Okay, let's just dive right into this. Welcome everyone to our latest explainer. Today, we're stepping back in time to uncover a truly fascinating piece of medical history. We are looking at the final master evolution of a text that completely changed the landscape of alternative medicine, Samuel Hahnemann's Organon of Medicine. Now, what's really remarkable here is that the version we're exploring today, the definitive 6th edition, well, it remained completely hidden for decades. It wasn't until well after Hahnemann's death that an interleaved manuscript from 1842 was actually discovered, and it completely upended homeopathic history. It was essentially a copy of his previous 5th edition, but it was absolutely stuffed with handwritten pages, edits, and profound shifts in his thinking.
Just listen to the immense enthusiasm here. He wrote, "I have now, after 18 months of work, finished the 6th edition, the most nearly perfect of all." You can literally hear the pride in those words, right? Hahnemann wrote this in a letter to his publisher, Mr. Schaub, back in February of 1842. And honestly, this is the truly incredible part. Hahnemann was an 86-year-old doctor at the time, living in Paris. He was capping off his life's work, and he was insisting to his publisher that it be printed with the absolute best possible paper and perfectly new type, mainly because he knew, at his advanced age, that this was very likely going to be his final contribution to the world.
So, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. A masterpiece at 86. 2. Defining the life principle. 3. The origin of disease. 4. Rethinking dosages and potencies. And finally, number 5, treating chronic diseases.
Section 1. A masterpiece at 86. The human element behind the final revision.
To really grasp the weight of this text, we kind of have to understand the historical scene. Hahnemann wasn't just sitting quietly in retirement, He was in Paris, running an incredibly active, highly in-demand medical practice at 86 years old. In the 1840s, that was an astoundingly advanced age to be working that hard. Yet he took his printed copy of the 1833 5th edition and painstakingly interleaved it with blank pages. Paragraph by paragraph, he made meticulous changes. He was striking things out, adding massive annotations, and just completely rewriting entire sections. And according to his translator, William Borick, he did all of this in a wonderfully small, exceptionally clear handwriting that somehow remained perfectly legible decades later.
We actually know exactly how dedicated he was because of a letter he wrote to his most intimate friend and follower, Boninghausen. Hahnemann mentioned that he was working on this massive revision for several hours on Sundays and Thursdays. Now, you might be wondering, why only those days? Well, as he explained it, literally every single other hour of his week was entirely consumed by treating the sheer volume of patients flooding into his Parisian clinic. He had absolutely zero free time otherwise, so he was fitting the revision of his life's philosophy into his only fleeting moments of rest.
Section 2. Defining the life principle. A shift in philosophical terminology. As Hahnemann revised his work, his foundational philosophy underwent this subtle but incredibly important shift, and it centered heavily on the term dynamis. Words matter, especially in philosophy, and Hahnemann wanted to be as precise as humanly possible. In a highly detailed footnote added to paragraph 11, he concludes that there is an invisible dynamic force that animates the human body. If you're new to this concept, think of it less like a physical organ or a fluid you can put under a microscope, and much more like the fundamental energy or, say, the software that tells the physical hardware of your body how to function and stay alive. The crucial takeaway here is how this contrasts with his older work. In his former editions, he frequently relied on the term vital force, but in this final 6th edition, specifically anchoring paragraphs 22 and 29, he replaces it almost entirely with life principle, or dynamis. He really wanted to distance himself from the idea of a physical, mechanical force and lean all the way into the concept of a dynamic, immaterial principle that fundamentally governs human health. Section 3. The origin of disease. Reframing the cause of illness. So if health is maintained by this invisible life principle, what happens when we get sick? Hahnemann tackled this head-on in paragraph 148, which, by the way, is practically wholly new in this final edition. Let's put on our tutor hats for a quick second and break down this specific Latin term, materia peccans. Materia simply means matter or substance, and peccans means sinning or offending. So literally an offending material substance. Back in 19th century medicine, tons of doctors believed disease was caused by a literal physical sludge, a poison, or some bad material in the body that just had to be purged or bled out. Hahnemann completely and emphatically denied this. In this final edition, he outright rejects the idea that physical matter is the ultimate root cause of illness. Instead, he argued that disease begins as a disturbance in that invisible software, that life principle we just talked about. The physical symptoms you end up seeing, those are just the end result of that inner dynamic disturbance. Section 4. Rethinking dosages and potencies. A radical departure from older methods. Now, while the philosophy is definitely fascinating, paragraphs 246 to 248 hold what are arguably the most important practical, real-world changes in the entire book. For years, the extremely strict rule in Hahnemann's earlier editions was the single dose. The idea was, you give the patient one dose of the remedy, and you just wait. You let it work its way through the system without any interference whatsoever. But in his final years in Paris, treating these highly complex cases, his vast experience led to a pretty radical new view. He now advised the repetition of the dosage. But hold on, he didn't mean taking the exact same pill over and over again. He instructed that these repeated doses must be given in different potencies. To visualize this, imagine putting a single drop of dye into a bucket of water, then taking a single drop from that bucket and putting it into a completely new bucket of fresh water, over and over. He believed slightly altering the strength or dilution with each successive dose would gently nudge the life principle back into balance without overwhelming the patient. He also used this final revision to firmly shut down a major debate of his time. Paragraph 273 addresses the vexed question of double remedies. Basically, some practitioners were experimenting by giving two different remedies at the exact same time. Hahnemann's verdict, in the final edition, absolute impropriety. No way. He strictly banned the mixing of remedies, stating all doubts on the matter were officially removed, making an exception only for naturally occurring chemical compounds. So the rule was one single remedy at a time, just repeated in varying potencies. Section 5, Treating Chronic Diseases. A new protocol for deep-rooted illness. Deep-rooted, stubborn illnesses were the ultimate test of his system. To address them, Hahnemann added a wholly new and incredibly important footnote to paragraph 282. In it, he targeted 3 specific chronic conditions, which he called miasms: psora, syphilis, and psychosis, which was commonly associated with figworts. In his view, a miasm wasn't just a passing infection, it was a deep, inherited taint, a profound dynamic disturbance rooted in the body that required an entirely new treatment methodology, departing completely from the advice in his former editions. Let's walk through this new 3-step protocol together, because it's a brilliant masterclass in his revised clinical logic. Step 1. Commence treatment early with large doses of the specific remedies for these chronic conditions. Step 2. Rather than that old single dose we talked about, he says to take them several times daily if necessary. Step 3. Gradually ascend to higher degrees of dynamization. Now, dynamization just means that specific process of diluting and shaking the remedy to unlock its energy, the bucket analogy. So he's saying, start with a large dose, repeat it daily, and gradually increase the energetic potency over time to literally push the deep-rooted disease out of the system. Actually, scratch that. There is one highly specific exception noted in this final text. For psychosis, specifically the presentation of figworts, Hahnemann notes that a local application of the remedy is actually considered necessary in tandem with the internal use. This was a really surprising shift, and it shows a level of pragmatic flexibility in his final years when he was dealing with this specific physical manifestation. When translator William Borwick finally brought this text to the English-speaking world in 1921, he was in absolute awe of what the 86-year-old Hahnemann had achieved. As Borwick beautifully wrote, this 6th edition is the high watermark of medical philosophy, the practical interpretation of which produces a veritable mountain of light. Borwick firmly believed this text completed a marvelous array of philosophic insight, and that Hahnemann's strict law of cure would guide physicians into a completely new world of therapeutics. Which leaves us with this final thought. We've seen how an 86-year-old physician completely overhauled his own life's work, moving from physical, vital forces to a dynamic life principle, and radically changing his own strict rules on dosages. So, how might Hahnemann's mountain of light and his very strict 19th century law of cure challenge our modern 21st century understanding of how therapeutics and the human body actually work today? It is a truly fascinating piece of history to explore, and I hope this explainer has given you the foundational knowledge to dive even deeper into the history of medical philosophy on your own. Thanks for exploring this with me, and keep questioning.